Before we begin, understand this. This is not just a story about a bomb. It is not just a story about prison walls or a courtroom. This is a story about 4 men who walked into a jail alive and never walked out, even though the truth was never proven. If you believe justice should be based on facts, not fear, you're in the right place. And if stories like this matter to you, take a moment now to subscribe, because every story on this channel uncovers the hidden side of real American crime that history tried to bury. Now listen carefully, because once this story begins, there is no turning back. The prison yard was silent, but fear filled the air. On the morning of November 11th, 1887, 4 men stood inside Cook County Jail in Chicago, waiting to die. They were not armed. They were not caught throwing a bomb. Yet the state of Illinois had decided their fate. The nooses were ready. Guards stood stiff. Outside the prison walls, crowds gathered in anger, grief, and confusion. Some prayed, some shouted, some believed justice was about to be done. Others believed a terrible crime was about to be committed by the government itself. As the clock moved closer to the hour, one question burned in the minds of people across America and around the world. Were these men being executed for murder, or were they being killed for what they believed? That question has never been answered clearly, and once the trapdoors opened, there would be no turning back. But how did a peaceful labor rally turn into one of the most famous executions in American history? To understand that moment, we must go back to a city boiling with anger, fear, and change. Chicago in the 1880s was loud, crowded, and restless. Factories ran day and night. Immigrants poured in from Europe, searching for work and hope. Men, women, and even children worked long hours for little pay. Injuries were common. Deaths were ignored. Factory owners grew rich while workers struggled just to eat. Out of this pain came a powerful demand. Workers wanted something simple, an 8-hour workday. Not 10, not 12, just 8. Protests began spreading across the country. In Chicago, the movement was strong and organized. Many workers followed socialist and anarchist ideas. These ideas scared business owners and politicians. Newspapers began calling labor leaders dangerous. Police were told to watch them closely. On May 1st, 1886, thousands of workers went on strike. Marches filled the streets. Most were peaceful. Families walked together. Speakers talked about fairness, not violence, but tension was everywhere. 2 days later, on May 3rd, police fired into a crowd of striking workers at the McCormick Reaper factory. At least 2 workers were killed. Many were injured. The news spread fast. Anger exploded. A protest meeting was planned for the next night at Haymarket Square. On May 4th, the rally began calmly. It was raining. Only a few thousand people showed up. Speakers stood on a wagon and talked about workers' rights. The mayor of Chicago even stopped by and left, saying the meeting was peaceful. But late that night, police moved in to end the rally. Then, without warning, a bomb flew through the air. It landed near the police line and exploded. The blast killed one officer instantly. Gunfire followed. Chaos broke out. When the smoke cleared, 7 police officers were dead. Several civilians were dead or wounded too. The person who threw the bomb was never identified. That fact did not stop the arrests. Police raided homes, offices, and meeting halls. They arrested known anarchists, even those who were not at Haymarket Square when the bomb exploded. 8 men were charged with murder. Their names would soon become famous. August Spies, Albert Parsons, Adolf Fischer, George Engel, Samuel Fielden, Michael Schwab, Louise Ling, and Oscar Neebe.
Some were speakers, some were writers, some were organizers. None were proven to have thrown the bomb. The trial began in June 1886, and from the start, it was clear the courtroom was not neutral. The jury was carefully chosen to avoid anyone sympathetic to labor. Newspapers called the defendants monsters before any evidence was heard. The judge allowed weak testimony and ignored serious problems with the case. Prosecutors argued something dangerous. They said the men were guilty not because they threw the bomb, but because their words inspired violence, because they believed in anarchism, because they challenged authority. In other words, they were being punished for ideas. The jury returned guilty verdicts. 7 men were sentenced to death. 1 received a long prison sentence. The world reacted in shock.
Protests erupted in Europe and across the United States. Famous writers, religious leaders, and politicians begged for mercy. They said the trial was unfair. They said this was not justice. Inside prison, the men waited. Days turned into months. Appeals were denied. Clemency requests were rejected. The walls closed in. Then something unexpected happened. In November 1887, just days before the executions, Louis Ling was found dead in his cell. Officials said he had taken his own life using a small explosive device. Some believed he did not want the state to kill him. Others believed something darker had happened. Now, only 4 men remained sentenced to die. The governor reduced the sentences of 2 others to life in prison. Oscar Neebe remained behind bars, but for Spies, Parsons, Fisher, and Engel, the end was near. The night before the executions, each man was allowed to write final letters. They wrote to families, to supporters, to the future. One wrote that history would judge their deaths more loudly than their voices ever could. As dawn broke over Chicago, the prison prepared. The men were let out one by one. Shackles clinked. Faces were calm, but eyes told a different story. Some prayed, some stood silent. One shouted words that would echo for decades. The trapdoors were set, and in that moment, America crossed a line it could never erase. But what happened next would change how the nation remembered this case forever. And when the bodies were cut down, the story did not end. It only grew louder. Because years later, the truth would return in a way no one expected. And it would force the country to ask again, was this justice? Or was it political revenge? Stay with me. The prison doors slammed shut, but the noise outside grew louder. On the day after the executions, Chicago did not feel calm. It felt wounded. Black flags hung from windows. Factories stopped work. Thousands of people filled the streets, not to riot, but to mourn. The men were gone, but their deaths had lit a fire that could not be put out. Funeral processions stretched for miles. Workers walked in silence. Mothers held their children close. Police lined the roads, watching carefully, afraid that grief might turn into rage. Newspapers across America argued with each other. Some praised the hangings as justice. Others called them a stain on the nation. And inside the prison, the remaining Haymarket prisoners listened to the echoes of a world changing without them. Michael Schwab and Samuel Fielden sat in their cells, alive but broken. Oscar Neebe remained locked away, sentenced to years behind bars. They had escaped death, but not punishment. Every sound of keys, every step of a guard reminded them that they were still prisoners of a trial many believed was unfair. Outside, questions refused to disappear. Who really threw the bomb? Why was no solid proof ever shown? Why were men executed for speeches and writings instead of actions? These questions haunted the case like a shadow. As months passed, new voices joined the debate. Lawyers studied the trial records and found serious problems.
Witnesses had changed their stories, evidence had been rushed, jurors admitted they were afraid to rule any other way. One by one, cracks began to appear in the wall that had once looked solid. Then came a turning point no one expected. In 1893, Illinois had a new governor. His name was John Peter Altgeld. He was not a radical, he was not an anarchist, he was a businessman and a politician, but he believed deeply in fairness. Altgeld decided to reopen the Haymarket case. What he found disturbed him. He read transcripts late into the night. He reviewed police actions. He examined how the jury had been selected. Again and again, he saw bias, pressure, and fear driving the process instead of truth. He reached a conclusion that shocked the nation. The trial had not been fair. In June 1893, Governor Altgeld issued a full pardon to the surviving Haymarket prisoners. He declared they had been wrongly convicted. He stated clearly that there was no proof linking them to the bomb. The reaction was explosive. Business leaders called him a traitor. Newspapers attacked him. Political allies abandoned him. His career would never recover. But Altgeld did not back down. He said something simple and powerful. Justice must be stronger than fear. For the freed men, the prison gates finally opened. Schwab, Fielden, and Neeb walked into sunlight as free men, but the world they returned to was not the same. They carried the weight of years stolen from their lives. They carried the memory of friends who had died on the gallows. And they carried a truth that could not bring those men back. The executed prisoners were innocent in the eyes of the law now, but the rope had already done its work. As years passed, the Haymarket Executions became a symbol. To some, they were proof that the government would kill to protect power. To others, they were a warning about chaos and radical ideas. The story divided America long after the last echo of the bomb had faded. Statues were built, then torn down. Police memorials were raised, then vandalized. Each side fought to control the memory of Haymarket. Even today, the question remains unsettled. Were the executions a mistake made during a time of fear?
Or were they a message sent to silence a movement? Inside prisons across America, the lesson was clear. Words could be dangerous, ideas could lead to chains, and belief itself could become a crime. The Haymarket case changed how political prisoners were viewed. It shaped how the government treated protest, labor, and radical thought. It showed how quickly justice could bend when society felt threatened. And it left behind one final, chilling truth. Once a nation accepts killing men for what they believe, not what they prove, the line between law and revenge disappears. But the Haymarket story still had one more turn, because years later, evidence would surface that hinted at the real bomber's identity. And if that truth had come sooner, the ropes might never have tightened. That revelation would force America to face its past one last time and decide whether it had learned anything at all. Stay with me. The truth did not arrive with a confession. It came quietly, years later, like a whisper that refused to fade. Long after the gallows were taken down and the crowds went home, people kept asking the same question. If the executed men did not throw the bomb, then who did? The police never found the bomber. The courts never proved a hand, a face, or a name. Yet the state had already closed the case with rope and silence. But history has a way of reopening locked doors. As time passed, witnesses spoke more freely. Former jurors admitted they felt trapped. Some said they believed the men were innocent, but feared public anger if they voted otherwise. Reporters looked back and saw how headlines had pushed the jury before the trial even began. Police files showed rushed arrests and ignored leads. And then there was the bomb itself. Experts later studied how the device was made. It did not match the skills of most of the men who were executed. One suspect, a man known to police for building explosives, fit the description far better. He had vanished after the bombing. He was never brought to trial. His name faded while others died. By then, it was too late. The men hanged at Cook County Jail could not be pardoned from the grave. Governor Altgeld's pardon had cleared the survivors, but it could not bring back the dead. Their families carried loss that no document could heal. Wives grew old alone. Children grew up without fathers. Graves became places of quiet anger. Yet something powerful happened. The Haymarket prisoners became symbols. Workers around the world remembered them every May 1st. Labor Day events carried their names. Songs were written. Stories were told. They were no longer just defendants in a courtroom. They were warnings. Warnings about fear. Warnings about power. Warnings about what happens when justice is rushed. Inside American prisons, the case left deep marks. Political beliefs were watched more closely. Protest leaders were treated as threats. Guards learned that silence could be enforced not just with walls, but with fear. The Haymarket Executions taught the system something dangerous, that the law could stretch when the public demanded blood. But it also taught the people something else, that the law must be questioned. Years later, monuments went up and came down. One statue honored fallen police officers, another honored the workers. Each was attacked by the other side. Each told a different version of the same story. Who was right? Who was wrong? Who deserved justice? Even today, students read about Haymarket and ask the same question the crowd asked in 1887. Were those men guilty, or were they punished to make an example? Most historians now agree on one thing. The trial was deeply flawed. Evidence was weak. The verdict was driven by fear. The executions were not about the bomb alone. They were about control, about stopping a movement, about warning others not to challenge power. That does not mean the bombing didn't matter. Police officers died. Families suffered. Violence was real. But justice is not meant to answer violence with more injustice. And that is why the Haymarket case still matters. It shows how quickly a nation can lose its balance, how easy it is to trade fairness for safety, how fast words can become crimes. The executed men in 1887 never lived to see their names cleared, but history did something the court did not. It listened, it questioned, and it judged again. Today, when people talk about political prisoners, unfair trials, and punishment for belief, the shadow of Haymarket still stands behind the words. It reminds us that justice is not just about law, it is about courage. The courage to slow down, the courage to doubt, the courage to protect truth, even when fear is loud. Because once a society decides that ideas deserve death, no one is truly safe. And that is the final weight of the Haymarket executions. Not just what happened, but what could happen again. And that question still hangs in the air, waiting for the next time fear asks for a rope. At this point in the story, you can feel it. This was never just about one night in Chicago. It was about power, fear, and how fast justice can disappear when the crowd demands blood. If you're still watching right now, it means you care more about truth than headlines. This channel exists for people who want the full story, not the easy one. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your moment. Because the stories we tell here don't just explain crime, they expose how systems fail and how innocent lives can be lost forever. And what happens next in this story will change how you see justice itself. Stay with me.
The rope was gone, but its shadow never left. Years after the executions, America tried to move on. Factories kept running, cities kept growing, new laws were written, new prisons were built. But the lesson of Haymarket stayed hidden inside the system, quietly shaping how power was used. And it showed itself again. Across the country, workers who spoke too loudly were watched. Organizers were arrested for small reasons. Meetings were broken up before they could begin. Police no longer waited for violence. Fear had taught them to strike first. Inside prisons, something changed too. Guards remembered Haymarket. Wardens remembered how quickly public anger could turn into approval for harsh punishment. Prison walls became places not just to hold criminals, but to silence voices. Men were locked away not only for what they did, but for what they believed. The Haymarket Executions had set a dangerous example. That example did not fade with time. When new protests rose in the 1890s, newspapers used the same words they had used before: dangerous, radical, enemy. Politicians warned that order was under threat. Police were given more power. Courts moved faster. Juries felt pressure again. Fear had learned how to wear a legal mask. Yet something else was growing too: memory. Workers told their children the Haymarket story, not as a tale of bombs, but as a warning about rushed justice, about courts that listened to crowds instead of facts, about how easy it is to hang the wrong men when fear is louder than truth. Every year on May 1st, people gathered, quietly at first, then louder. They remembered the men who stood on a wagon and spoke about fairness. They remembered the men who stood on a trapdoor and refused to beg. These gatherings were peaceful, but authorities watched them closely, because memory can be powerful. It can challenge the stories that power tells. Inside law schools, the case became a lesson. Students read the trial transcripts. They saw how evidence was twisted, how juries were shaped, how judges allowed bias to grow. Haymarket became proof that the law is only as fair as the people who enforce it. Some students would become lawyers, some would become judges, some would become wardens, and some would remember. The families of the executed men never forgot. They visited graves, they saved letters, they told stories passed down through generations. For them, Haymarket was not history. It was a wound that never closed. Their pain asked a question that still matters. If the state admits it was wrong, but only after men are dead, is that justice, or is it too late to matter? Governor Altgeld paid a heavy price for telling the truth. He lost political support. He was attacked in the press. His career ended early. But history treated him more kindly. Today, he is remembered as a man who chose fairness over power. That choice is rare, and it is risky, because speaking truth after fear has taken control often costs more than silence. The Haymarket case did something else that few expected. It showed how prisons could be used as tools of politics, not just to punish crime, but to send messages. Messages that said, do not challenge us. Do not organize. Do not speak too loudly. That lesson traveled forward in time. It appeared again during war. It appeared again during strikes. It appeared again whenever the nation felt threatened. Each time the question returned, are we punishing actions or beliefs? The executed men never asked to be heroes. They asked for fairness. They asked for proof. They asked for a trial that listened. They did not get it. But their story forced future generations to ask harder questions about courts, about prisons, about power, and about how easily justice can bend when fear is in charge. Today, the Haymarket bombing is still debated. The bomber's name remains uncertain. The truth remains incomplete, but one fact is clear. The men who died did not receive a fair trial. And once that truth is accepted, the title of this story becomes unavoidable. The execution of the Haymarket prisoners was not just about justice. It was about control. It was about fear.
It was about making an example.
And that is why it still matters. Because every time a society chooses speed over fairness, punishment over proof, and silence over truth, it walks the same path. A path that ends not with safety, but with regret. The gallows at Cook County Jail are long gone. The prison has changed. The city has grown. But the question still stands. Justice or political revenge? And the answer depends on what we choose to learn or what we choose to forget. Stay with me. The story should have ended with regret, but instead it kept repeating. Years after Haymarket, new prisons rose across America. Steel bars replaced stone. Electric lights replaced candles. Officials claimed the system was improving. They said justice was becoming cleaner, smarter, safer. Yet deep inside those walls, the same lesson lived on. Fear still ruled. Whenever the country felt threatened, the memory of Haymarket returned, even if people did not say the name out loud. When workers organized, when voices grew loud, when ideas challenged power, the response was often the same. Watch them, arrest them early, make an example. Prisons became the quiet answer to loud questions. Men were locked up before crimes happened. Meetings were treated like threats. Words were studied as if they were weapons. The law had learned something dangerous from Haymarket, that you could punish belief and call it protection. And the public often agreed. Newspapers played their part again. Headlines warned of danger. They painted protesters as enemies. They told people that harsh punishment was necessary to stay safe. Fear sold papers. Fear won elections. And fear filled cells. Inside those prisons, inmates learned a hard truth. Justice did not always follow truth. It followed pressure. It followed anger. It followed whoever shouted the loudest. Some prisoners had committed crimes. Others had only spoken. But bars do not tell the difference. The Haymarket case had opened a door. Once opened, it was hard to close. Yet resistance never fully disappeared. Teachers told the story quietly. Lawyers argued harder. Judges sometimes remembered the past and slowed things down. The case became a warning, passed from one careful mind to another. Do not rush. Do not assume. Do not confuse fear with facts. But warnings are easy to ignore when panic returns. And panic always returns. In later years, when new threats appeared, the same old question came back. Is this about safety, or is this about control? Haymarket taught America how thin that line can be. The men who were executed never saw the world change, but their deaths shaped it. Their names were spoken whenever justice was questioned, whenever prisons were used to silence instead of protect. They became ghosts in the system. Not haunting, watching, waiting. Their story asks something uncomfortable. If the state can kill innocent men once under pressure, what stops it from doing so again? The answer is not laws alone. Laws existed in 1887. Courts existed. Judges existed. What failed was courage. The courage to stand against the crowd. The courage to say, we do not have proof. The courage to wait. Without that courage, justice becomes a performance, a show to calm fear, a sacrifice to restore order. That is what Haymarket truly exposed. Not just a bad trial, but a weak moment. A moment when fear won. And moments like that shape history more than we like to admit. Today, when people argue about prisons, protests, and punishment, Haymarket is still there, hidden behind new names, new threats, new laws. But the question is the same. Are we punishing actions or beliefs? Are we protecting lives or protecting power? The answer decides who sleeps free and who sleeps behind bars. The executed men asked one thing before they died, that the truth would matter someday. In a way, it did.
Not enough to save them, but enough to warn others. That warning still stands. Because justice is not tested when it is easy, it is tested when fear is loud, when crowds demand answers, when leaders want calm at any cost. That is when the rope feels tempting. And that is when history leans closer, watching, waiting, to see if we remember or if we repeat. Stay with me. The final lesson of Haymarket was not written in a courtroom. It was written in silence. Long after the crowds faded and the headlines stopped shouting, the executions remained, heavy and unmoving, like stones placed on the nation's conscience. No new trial could erase them. No pardon could undo the drop of the trapdoor. The men were dead, and America had to live with that choice. That is how this story truly ends. Not with certainty, but with responsibility. The Haymarket prisoners were not proven bombers. History now agrees on that. The real person who threw the bomb was never identified with proof strong enough to stand in court. What was proven, years too late, was something else. Fear had replaced fairness. Ideas had been treated as weapons, and punishment had arrived before truth. That is why this case refuses to die. Because it is not just about 1887. It is about every moment after, when power feels threatened and justice feels slow. Haymarket shows how easy it is for a system to convince itself that speed matters more than accuracy, that silence matters more than rights. The executions answered the public's fear, but they did not answer the truth. And once that door opened, it could never fully close. Inside prisons, the lesson echoed for generations. Inmates learned that the law was not always blind, that belief could become a sentence, that the line between guilt and danger was thin when the public was afraid. Outside prisons, citizens learned something too, even if they did not realize it right away, that justice must be guarded, because it does not guard itself. The men executed after Haymarket never saw their names cleared. But history did something the courts failed to do in time. It listened again. It slowed down, and it asked the question that matters most. Not who was loudest, not who was feared, but who was proven guilty. And that question still matters today. Because every generation faces its own Haymarket moment. A crisis, a threat, a demand for fast answers. And every generation must decide whether it will choose patience or panic. The rope is never far away. It just changes shape. The story of the Haymarket prisoners is not a story of heroes or villains alone. It is a story of a system under pressure, and what happens when that pressure breaks it. Justice did not fail loudly that day. It failed quietly. And that is the most dangerous kind of failure. So when we ask the title's question one last time, the answer becomes clearer, even if it is uncomfortable. The executions were not justice in the pure sense of the word.
They were a response to fear. They were a warning. They were political revenge dressed in law. And the cost was 4 lives that could never be returned. That is where this story ends. Not with closure, but with a choice. To remember or to forget. Because forgetting is how it happens again. And remembering is the only thing that ever stops it. The men in this story never got a second chance. No appeal brought them back. No apology erased the rope. No correction of history could undo what was done. All that remains is the lesson. And lessons like this only survive if they are remembered. If this story made you think, if it made you uncomfortable, or if it made you question what justice really means, then this channel is for you. Subscribe now, because every video here tells a real American crime story that history doesn't want you to look at too closely. And the next story is already waiting. Stay curious, stay aware, and never stop asking who really pays the price when fear is in control.